I never would have thought I'd be drinking contaminated water surrounded by the Great Lakes.
Flint, Michigan is having a water crisis. Currently, the National Guard and Red Cross are handing out bottled water and filters to residents. On January 16th, President Obama declared a federal emergency in Flint, freeing up $5 million in federal aid. According to the EPA, the maximum safe level of lead in drinking water is 0 parts per billion. 5 is the threshold for concern. Flint water has been regularly tested above 100 ppb by a Virginia Tech research team. And in at least one home, the team measured above 13,000. 5,000 is considered toxic waste by the agency.
That water is much more corrosive, and that corrosivity is causing the lead to leach out of lead service lines, galvanized pipe, and copper lines that use lead solder.
Flint, like many once booming industrial towns in Michigan, has been in so much financial trouble that the state appointed emergency managers to take care of the budget and rein in spending.
Here's the Flint.
In 2013, those emergency managers authorized a move to join the Karagandhi Water Authority.
Well, as the emergency manager appointed to Flint in, I think it was 2013, it was my responsibility to oversee the decision that had been made regarding the transfer from Flint from DWSD to the Karagandhi water system.
At the end of 2013, 3 years before the new pipeline was finished, Detroit notified Flint it would stop selling the city water by April 2014. So Flint needed water. It chose the nearby Flint River. When the water source was switched, an additive that prevents corrosion of pipes wasn't used, despite being mandated by federal law. It would have cost approximately $100 a day. Almost immediately, complaints came in of discolored, poor-tasting, and foul-smelling water. In September 2015, out of suspicion of high levels of lead in the water, Dr. Mona Hana-Atisha, a local doctor, began testing the blood of local children.
This research is concerning. These results are concerning. And when our national guiding organizations tell us primary prevention is the most important thing and that lead poisoning is potentially irreversible, then we have to say something.
She found that the lead levels had doubled on average and even tripled in some children. Virginia Tech professor Mark Edwards claimed that the corrosiveness of the water was causing lead to leach into the water supply. It's gotten so dire that a family fun night was held at a Flint elementary school to encourage children to have their blood tested. A major concern is that about half of Flint's roughly 40,000 homes are at least 50 years old, and many have old lead pipes or lead solder. The city has switched back to its original water source with Detroit, but the city's water still has high levels of lead, and now the number of Legionnaire's disease infections, which is spread through water, has increased dramatically. And that recent $5 million from the federal government? It's a start. But Michigan Governor Rick Snyder's application for federal aid suggested it may take as much as $100 million to fix Flint's water.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
We're paying, and we shouldn't have to pay for this.
It's not tea. It's not soda. This is the Hilton family's drinking water.
It's unacceptable. We've got nasty water.
They moved into the Jordan Woods neighborhood about 8 months ago.
We started noticing just a couple months after being in, the water was starting to smell a little swampy.
Their water seemed to be coming out clear, but over time was staining their appliances.
We'll bypass this.
So that's when they checked the water filter that came with the house.
Filter itself.
And what they found is nothing short of disgusting.
It's destroying a 4-phase, 6-month sediment filter in a week or 2-week period of time at $30 a pop.
So the Hiltons called their water company, Utilities Inc., for answers.
They said that they were going to send somebody out to flush it.
Well, they did, and this is what they found. By the looks of it, you would think this neighborhood struck oil. And WNCN Investigates found it's a neighborhood-wide problem.
The water's got to the point where we've not been able to drink it.
Down the street, Pam Strickland says even their portable water filter is starting to stain.
It is eating up the chrome of our fixtures. We're going to have to buy new shower heads soon.
You pay money to have it, to drink it, and it's useless.
And across from them is Terry Ragsdale.
The water out here is terrible. Some days it looks like tea. It's left stains around the toilets. The tubs are permanently stained.
As a City of Raleigh firefighter, he knows a thing or two about water, and he's been trying to get this problem fixed for years.
What is it doing to us?
They said that's just manganese and iron, and it's good for you.
So this is the community well that provides all the water for the 35 homes in the Jordan Woods subdivision. It's got a 3,000-gallon storage tank that the company admits is too small for this size community, and part of the reason that their water looks like this. But if you ask the company, they'll tell you it's safe to drink.
I can clearly understand their concern and would like to extend their sincere apologies for any type of inconveniences the iron and manganese may have caused them. But the water is safe.
It's safe, but we have a sample from those homes, and this is, the water that's being pumped into their homes. Would you drink this?
Well, Jonathan, I have no idea the origin of that water, so I cannot comment as to whether I would drink that or not.
Is this a product, though, that you would feel comfortable putting out to these homes?
That's not a product that I'd like to put out to our customers, no.
So we asked the state, how can this water be acceptable?
Because it's not a health-based water quality standard, there's really nothing to trigger us to go out and investigate.
The bottom line, it all comes down to priorities, and the state breaks it down into two categories. Primary standards are legally enforceable and limit contaminants that can affect public health, but secondary standards deal with smell, taste, and color and are not mandatory. The company is required to submit their own test results for secondary standards to the state every 3 years. We pulled those reports and found the company has been violating state standards for manganese for over 2 decades. The latest levels 3 times higher.
We've received, over the past 2 years, about 9 complaints from our customers in Jordan Woods.
EPA studies show extreme exposure to manganese can damage the nervous system in adults and cause learning disabilities in children, but they make it clear at these levels the water is not a health risk.
It sounds like there's really no enforcement action that they can take to say, this is nasty water, it needs to be cleaned up.
If the problem continues, then yes, they can develop a compliance schedule.
It's an aesthetic issue. It's one of our secondary limits.
To them it's secondary, but to us it's still one of the primary concerns.
For these homeowners, it's money down the drain.
You can't wash clothes in this. You can't, you really don't want to bathe in it. You can't drink it. You can't cook with it. About the only thing it's good for is flushing a toilet. There's a 50-50 shot that the water might come through clear, or it might come through brown. Unreal to me that in 2016, in the most powerful country in the world, we're allowing an entire generation to grow up not knowing what clean water is.
For now, it used to be a key destination for fishermen and a major whitewater rafting attraction to adrenaline junkies. As you can see here, there's nothing white about the Animas River in Colorado right now. A mistake by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency saw more than 11 million liters of toxic chemicals flowing into these waters. And the error by the authorities led to some of the worst elements of the periodic table contaminating the river. Cadmium is one of them. Exposure to large doses of it can be fatal. At their peak, levels of arsenic in the river exceeded the norm by 300 times. The substance is known to be carcinogenic, while traces of lead simply flew off the charts, reaching 3,500 times above the normal levels. And exposure can lead to bone disease and even damage the nervous system as well. Now, ironically, the spill was a result of the government's failed attempt to clean up an abandoned mine. The accident, though, not going unnoticed on social media. Some were left heartbroken to see the river turn yellow. Others compared abandoned mines to ticking time bombs. And that led to questions about whether messing with the mine which sent down the sludge in the first place was even that necessary. Senior associate with Environment Colorado, Jean Bassett, says a lack of accountability means, as always, it's the people left to pick up the pieces.
It was an accident, and obviously it was a horrible accident. But the point is that where were the mining companies? Why aren't they cleaning up their mess? This is really an accountability issue of the people who created the problem to begin with. The gold mine where the accidents happened hasn't been in use for 92 years. It's having a devastating impact on these local communities. And that's also why we need to, in general, make sure that we're doing a better job of setting protections for our rivers and what flows into them.
We talked about how natural gas mining can be really bad for the environment due to the methane leaks that sometimes occur. And per amount leaked, methane is far worse, far more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide. We have a story here which really should be national news, and it is not. I have footage to play for you that our TV audience will see from December 17th, which shows a geyser of methane gas spewing from the earth. And as you can see here, if you're watching, it is visible via a specialized infrared camera operated by an Earthworks ITC certified thermographer. The Environmental Defense Fund released the footage last week. This is, quote, one of the biggest leaks we've ever seen reported and, quote, absolutely uncontained. This story really should be nonstop national news, but you probably haven't even heard about it. This is from Porter Ranch. It's a small town in California, and it's been stinking of natural gas leakage since October 23rd. A storage facility is spewing methane, and it has now forced thousands of people out of their homes to avoid the dangerous fumes that can cause illness. The California Air Resources Board shows that the methane gas is spewing into the air at a rate of somewhere between 44,000 and 58,000 kilograms per hour. This is an insane amount, Lewis, and Los Angeles city attorneys reached a settlement with SoCal Gas to arrange temporary housing for residents that are affected. People have been relocated, over 2,000 families relocated. The fumes pose a huge threat. This is huge, and we're hearing almost nothing about it on corporate media.
And I'm not sure why that is. I mean, disasters, natural disasters, things like that always get tons of media attention. Whenever families are displaced, right, there's lots of media coverage. The tornadoes, for instance, that just happened. And
sometimes that's a couple dozen families, right? We're talking about over 2,000 families here directly related to fossil fuels.
And I don't know. I don't know what I doubt that the corporate media outlets we're talking about have connections to this company. That's highly unlikely. So I'm not sure. I don't really have an answer here.
And to be clear, Wall Street analysts are saying that this incident is analogous to the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which was one of the biggest environmental disasters, period. And part of the problem in stopping the leaks here is that the base of the well is 8,000 feet underground. So initial efforts to stop the leak have not been successful. And remember, as I mentioned, methane, the main component of natural gas, is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide when it comes to its climate change impact. This is a huge, huge deal. 1/4 of the human-caused global warming that we've been experiencing is attributed to methane emissions. And so let's get to that question of why this is not national news. Is it because the visuals aren't as interesting? The leak is 8,000 feet underground, so you don't have those amazing visuals that were running 24/7 on CNN as Anderson Cooper described what was going on? Is it an issue of following the money? I don't know, because the BP is also a big funder, and they were literally advertising on CNN during the commercials about the coverage of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I don't know the answer, Lewis, but people are not aware of this, and this is huge, huge, huge.
Well, I think it's kind of just starting to break out.
Even though it's been 2 months.
Well, the coverage is
Right.
the coverage is just starting to break out. Yes, this has been going on for months. Maybe the residents didn't speak up as much as they should have, but it's happening in California. It's certainly not an area where there's no people around.
No.
Strange.
We have to get off of this stuff. We just don't need natural gas. We really don't if we make the right
It's a living,
decision.
breathing thing. The Assumption Parish Sinkhole, more than 200 days after it mysteriously began swallowing up the swamp, hundreds of residents are still under a mandatory evacuation order. As Katie Moore reports, the cavern that caused it is still collapsing, leaving Bayou Corn residents wondering if there will ever be an end in sight.
Bayou Corn has always been a peaceful place.
We could drop the boat right there and just take off to go fishing. It was just like a paradise.
But now it feels downright empty. Jamie Weber is gone. A sign on her old home says it's thanks to Texas brine. She had no idea that she was putting her mobile home on land on top of an underground salt dome, one full of caverns used to make brine or salt water, others used to store hazardous, potentially explosive gases. Geophysicists now say the western side of one of the brine caverns is collapsing, filling in from deep in the earth, causing the sinkhole at the surface to expand and contract.
On October 25th, we moved out of our home.
She and some of the 350 evacuated Bayou Corn residents packed a joint legislative hearing in Baton Rouge in recent days looking for answers. Many of the ones they keep getting are conflicting and confusing, especially from the state and the company that once mined the collapsing salt cavern, Texas Brine.
Senator, the cause of the sinkhole is the subject of pending litigation. At this point, I don't think it's proper to have any discussion about what the cause is and whether we accept what anyone has said regarding the cause of the sinkhole.
The cavern collapse led to the sinkhole and created a path for the natural gas and the crude oil to come to the surface.
That's Louisiana Department of Natural Resources Secretary Stephen Schutz. He slipped out a back door after the hearing without giving us the chance to ask him any questions.
The sinkhole is constantly changing. It changes every time we go out there.
Gary Hecox is an engineer consulting with DNR about what to do about the sinkhole. It's uncharted territory.
The cavern was 3,400 feet deep, which is deeper than any known cavern failure impacting the surface in the international record.
Meaning nowhere in the world has a brine cavern this large collapsed, and it's not finished yet.
We still have 450 feet to fill. How long is it going to take to fill this up? At 1 foot per day, we're looking at an ongoing event that's still going to run over a year.
Every time it shifts, recently installed seismic monitors pick up tremors like little earthquakes. When it does, big bubbles of natural gas, vegetation, and crude oil are released to the surface. They call it a burp.
It appears that the sand and gravel that's in the bottom of the sinkhole breaks up a large gas bubble into many small bubbles, just like an aquarium, and that is a good thing, because if you get a single bubble up and have an ignition source, you can have a flashover.
An explosion. Instead, those little bubbles are coming out all around the actual sinkhole site, with 20 new sites spotted in the last month. 9 months after the bubble sites first surfaced, Texas Brine started installing vent wells to alleviate the pressure underground. You can see some of them burning in 15 places around Bayou Corn.
We continue to install relief wells as fast as we can, and we'll keep doing so as long as they continue to be effective.
The problems in Bayou Corn aren't just ones you can see, but what you can't see. Take these guide wires, for example. During a recent rain, bubbles started coming up from around them. That's when residents knew the problems weren't just far off in the bayou.
A house acts like a tent, and so if it's migrating up through the soil and it's being caught in the house, it's building up concentrations in the house. And then if it reaches explosive level, then one little spark in the house would set it off.
Nick Romero now has 5 DEQ monitors installed in his house to measure natural gas and other chemicals.
We have had our grandkids, and now we can't. I love to fish, and now I don't want to.
They're struggling not just with the instability underground, but in their lives. Romero and some others haven't evacuated, but Weber did in October.
Once they told us that they wanted to put monitors in our house and that we'd have to live like, to me, like lab rats, there was no way for my kids to grow.
And Weber says they feel forgotten.
Four giant craters surrounded by dozens of smaller ones have been spotted by satellite in Russia's far north. Scientists fear they could point to a looming natural disaster. They are believed to be the result of underground methane gas eruptions, but scientists have not yet figured out the exact cause. One of the craters is just a few kilometers away from a natural gas processing plant. We spoke to a Russian researcher who's seen the site up close.
Obviously, this phenomenon is quite dangerous. It's a known fact that large craters appeared and swallowed whole buildings in many cities around the world. We should be able to give a definitive answer as to the origins of these craters once we have studied not one but several of them. The more the better. So far, an expedition organised by the Russian Center of Arctic Exploration has only examined the first crater. But we are already observing the other craters from space, and we are already developing a hypothesis on how they appeared. However, we have only been studying them for 6 months, and that is a relatively short period of time.
Now, the researchers group was one of the first to examine the craters last year, and he shared his experience.
We organised an expedition in November 2014 during the winter season. This was the first descent of a kind. At that time, scientists were able to go down this crater, which was 35 metres deep and 25 metres in diameter. This crater could fit a large apartment block. They carried out special research by means of a georadar. We were able to study the structure of the crater's bottom, as well as the upper part of the section around the crater. So now we have an idea of the Earth's structure around this first funnel.
A widening sinkhole has closed an Oregon Coastal Highway. The sinkhole has caused the closure of Oregon's Highway 101, threatening all lanes. No injuries have been reported. On Thursday, January 28th, the hole opened and kept growing following a nearby landslide which had broken a local water main. Dubbed a monster sinkhole, seen on the left, it is believed to be tied to another sinkhole, seen on the right, that began in mid-December. Thursday's sinkhole opened on Highway 101, while December's hole opened in the neighboring parking lot between the Chevron gas station and what once was Harbor Cafe. Crews have been working to repair the initial sinkhole when the second reared its ugly head. The first hole, like the new one, kept growing, reaching 50 feet in diameter with a depth of 50 to 70 feet. It began with initial depth of 7 feet and a width about the size of a volleyball. Officials have yet to be able to provide a size estimate for the
When was the last time you stopped to think about the one thing you can't live without? No, I'm not talking about the internet. I'm talking about water. Without clean drinking water, life couldn't go on. So it's probably important that we know what's in the water we drink. For the past 65 years, city governments nationwide have been adding a substance called fluoride to the water supply. The practice of water fluoridation started at a time in history when asbestos, PCBs, and DDT were all deemed safe and effective. And although all of these chemicals have been banned since, fluoridation is still a common practice. However, it's uniquely American. The U.S. has more people drinking fluoridated water than the rest of the world combined. In fact, most industrialized nations do not fluoridate their water, including Japan and 97% of Europe. So what exactly is it that we're ingesting? Well, it's not the same fluoride that's in your toothpaste. What's being added to municipal water supplies is a fluorine compound called hydrofluorosilicic acid, and it's a byproduct from the phosphate fertilizer industry. Yes, you heard me right. Let me break this down for you. Gaseous fluoride is produced during fertilizer production. Now, it used to go straight into the atmosphere from these factories, but Presently, filtration devices are used to contain the toxic chemicals, and what's extracted from the filters is then condensed into a water-based solution, which is packaged unrefined and sold to city governments for the purpose of water fluoridation. So how did this all start? Well, interestingly, in 1944, the American Dental Association themselves published that it was not worth the health risk to fluoridate water supplies. Too bad no one heeded their warning, because the very next year, Grand Rapids, Michigan became the first community to fluoridate. And what happened next would not have been possible without a push from the aluminum industry, which was looking for a way to safely discard their fluoride pollution and waste. In 1947, Oscar Ewing, a paid attorney for Alcoa, the biggest aluminum company in the U.S., was picked to oversee the Public Health Service, which is now known as the Department of Health and Human Services. He then made clear his lingering ties to the aluminum industry by promoting water fluoridation as one of the first official policies of the department. From there, the policy expanded tenfold, with an additional 87 U.S. cities fluoridating within the next 3 years. Fast forward to today, where children are growing up indoctrinated with the notion that fluoridated water is necessary because it prevents tooth decay. But is that really the case? In 1987, the National Institute of Dental Research examined 39,000 school children from 84 different fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. And while the study did find that in fluoridated areas tooth decay declined, the most interesting part is that there was a declining trend in tooth decay in non-fluoridated areas too, perhaps because of overall better hygiene. Okay, but not only is there no causal link, there's also serious health risks for fluoride overexposure. For one, an excess of fluoride causes fluorosis, which is the eating away of the enamel on your teeth. This is indicative of what it's doing to your body on a larger scale. You see, it doesn't just eat away at the tooth enamel. Only 50% of the fluoride we consume is excreted. The rest is absorbed throughout our bodies, our pineal glands, and our bones. In fact, an alarming study by the U.S. Public Health Service, which was later confirmed by Harvard Medical School, found that a deadly type of bone cancer called osteosarcoma was significantly higher in fluoridated communities than in non-fluoridated communities. However, the most distressing findings come from 18 studies done worldwide, showing a substantial lowering of IQ in overly fluoridated areas. And there are many more adverse effects than just those. Not to mention that the FDA admits that fluoride is a drug, not a nutrient. Multiple ethical codes are being violated here by forcing us to ingest this drug. Look, let's call it like it is. Water fluoridation has nothing to do with said benefits. Think about it. We're already getting our fair share of this substance through the dentist and the toothpaste we use every day. And what about the processed foods we're already eating and drinking on a daily basis? We get more than enough. So the argument that we need to ingest this substance as well is baseless. Look, guys, no matter what you think about fluoride, the real issue here is having a choice. No chemical, no matter what its alleged benefits are, should be forced upon the public without their consent. But let's not forget, as long as corporations are involved, our best interest isn't really the priority. So maybe we should be looking at water fluoridation as a money-making scam. It's a tale that's all too familiar. Governments and industry colluding to save money instead of saving lives.
Present this. It's produced by the New York Academy of Sciences, and it's a report on Chernobyl. Can be downloaded. They translated 5,000 articles from Russian the first time into English. It seems that nearly 1 million people have already died as a result of Chernobyl, despite what WHO says and the IAEA. This is one of the most monstrous cover-ups in the history of medicine, because everybody should know about this. Then we extrapolate through to Japan. Japan is, by orders of magnitude, many times worse than Chernobyl. Never in my life did I think that 6 nuclear reactors would be at risk. I knew the 3 GE engineers who helped design these Mark I GE reactors. They resigned because they knew they were dangerous. So Japan built them on an earthquake fault. The reactors partially withstood the earthquake, but the external electricity supply was cut off, and the external electricity supply supplies the cooling water 1 million gallons a minute to each of those 6 reactors. Without the cooling water, the water falls and the rods are so hot they melt, like at 3 Mile Island and at Chernobyl. So the emergency diesel generators, which are as large as a house, got destroyed by the tsunami. So there is no way to keep the water circulating in the reactors. Also, on the roofs of the reactors, not within the containment vessel, are cooling pools. Every year they remove about 30 tons of the most radioactive rods that you could possibly imagine. Each one is 12 feet long and ½ an inch thick. Gives out so much radiation, like X-rays, that if you stand next to it for a couple of minutes, you'll die. Not drop dead, but with, remember Litvinenko, the Russian who got poisoned by polonium? You'll die like that, with your hair falling out, bleeding to death and dying of massive infection, like AIDS patients die. So these are, and they're thermally hot, so they have to be put in a big pool and continually cooled too. The pool has really no roof. There have been 3 hydrogen explosions blowing off the roof of the building, not the containment vessel of the core, but the roof, and exposing the cooling pool. 2 of the cooling pools are dry. They have no water in them, meaning that the nuclear fuel rods are covered with a material called zirconium. When zirconium is exposed to air, it burns, it ignites. And there have been 2 of the fueling pools at this moment are burning. In the cooling pools are many times, like 10 to 20 times more radiation than in each reactor core. In each reactor core is as much long-lived radiation as that produced by 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. We are dealing with diabolical energy. E equals mc squared. It's the energy that blows up nuclear bombs. Einstein said, nuclear power is a hell of a way to boil water, because that is all nuclear power is used for, to boil water through the massive heat, turn it into steam, turn a turbine which generates electricity. Now, when you fission uranium, 200 new elements are formed, all of which are much more poisonous to the body than the original uranium. Although uranium's pretty poisonous, America used it in Fallujah and Baghdad, and in Fallujah, 80% of the babies being born are grossly deformed. They're being born without brains, single eyes, no arms. The doctors have told the women to stop having babies. The incidence of childhood cancer has gone up about 12 times. This is genocide. It's a nuclear war being conducted in Iraq. But uranium that they're using lasts for more than 4.5 billion years. So we're contaminating the cradle of civilization, the coalition of the willing. In the nuclear power plants, however, is a huge amount of radiation. 200 elements. Some last seconds, some last millions of years. Radioactive iodine lasts 6 weeks. It causes thyroid cancer. That's why people are saying, better take potassium iodide, because that blocks the thyroid uptake of radioactive iodine, which later can cause thyroid cancer. In Chernobyl, over 20,000 people have developed thyroid cancer. They have to have their thyroids out, and they will die unless they take thyroid replacement every day, like a diabetic has to take insulin. Strontium-90 will get out. It lasts for 600 years. It goes to the bone, where it causes bone cancer or leukemia. Cesium lasts for 600 years. It's all over Europe. 40% of Europe is still radioactive. Turkish food is extremely radioactive. Do not buy Turkish dried apricots. Do not buy Turkish hazelnuts or dried... the Turks were so cross with the Russians, they sent all their radioactive tea over to Russia after Chernobyl. But 40% of Europe is still radioactive. Farms in Britain, their lambs are so full of cesium they can't sell them. Don't eat European food. But that's nothing compared to what's happening now. One of the most deadly is plutonium, named after Pluto, god of the underworld. 1 millionth of a gram, if you inhale it, will give you cancer. Hypothetically, 1 pound, if evenly distributed, could give everyone on Earth cancer. Each reactor has 250 kilos of plutonium in it, kilograms. You only need 2.5 kilograms to make a bomb, because plutonium is what they make bombs with. It's the only country that has a reactor. From your uranium, you are the biggest exporters of uranium in the world, Cameco. Canada sells two things. It sells wheat for life and uranium for death. Right? Plutonium is going to get out and spread all over the northern hemisphere, and it's already heading towards North America now. Plus radioactive iodine-129, its half-life is 17 million years, plus strontium, plus cesium, plus tritium, and I could go on and on and on. When it rains, down comes fallout, and it concentrates in food. If it gets into the sea, the algae concentrated hundreds of times, then the crustaceans concentrated hundreds of times, then the little fish, then the big fish, then us. Because we stand on the apex of the food chain. You can't taste these radioactive elements, you can't see them, and you can't smell them. They're silent. When you get them inside your body, you don't suddenly drop dead of cancer. It takes 5 to 60 years to get your cancer. And when the cancer, if you feel a lump in your breast, doesn't say, I was made by some strontium-90 you ate in a piece of fish 20 years ago. All radiation is damaging. It's cumulative. Each dose you get adds to your risk of getting cancer. With americium, that's more dangerous than plutonium. I mean, I could go on and on. Depends if it rains, if you're going to get it or not. If it rains and the radiation comes down, don't grow food, don't eat the food, and I mean don't eat it for 600 years.
On Fairwind's film series, Fairwind's chief engineer Arnie Gundersen discusses the ongoing struggle for the people impacted by the ongoing Fukushima Daiichi disaster in his recent interview on Al Jazeera USA.
Well, let's talk about this with Arnie Gundersen. He joins us live from Tampa, Florida. He's the chief engineer at Fairwind's Energy Associates, is an energy consulting company. He is also a former executive in nuclear industry. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm curious to know, when we see the pictures out of the area around Fukushima, what does the future look like for them? How long will it be before things are truly back to normal?
Well, I think for the people within maybe 20 miles, they'll never get back to normal. You know, you'll see people walking around with these little handheld radiation detectors, and they're not really measuring the worst of the radiation. What we're finding are very, very small microscopic particles that are lodging in people's lungs. And the Japanese government is not taking that exposure into effect. The health consequences within 20 kilometers and 30 kilometers out are really significant and will be for decades.
So do you think the Japanese authorities are moving too quickly and trying to move in people to some of the outlying neighborhoods of the Fukushima plant?
Absolutely. You know, they're really forcing them to move in because they're taking away the money that they had been receiving to live remotely. And the only way they can continue to be on a stipend is to come back into that radiation. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. It's uncomfortable to live far away. On the other hand, it's worse to be in a high radiation area.
So when you look at this disaster, what do you think other nuclear plants around the world have learned from this?
Well, there's been a lot of lessons learned. Unfortunately, most of the changes are not being implemented. You know, we learned about this huge wave that can knock out the cooling systems of the plant. There's plants in the United States that have that same problem, but yet we have given those power plants as long as 10 years to make the required fixes. The emergency planning was proven to be a joke, and yet we've got Indian Point, which is only 20 miles from New York City, which continues to operate. So while we know the problems, we're really not getting to the meat of solving them.
But solving and fixing those problems, as you know, can cost an extremely large amount of money. So how do you balance the need for changes with the practicality that it takes a long time and a lot of money to fix these issues?
You know, I guess I get back to what part of Fukushima don't you understand? If you don't make these modifications, you run the risk of destroying the fabric of a country. It happened at Chernobyl, and it's happening right now in Japan. So to me, it's money well spent to make these modifications to prevent that from happening on our doorstep.
So let me ask you also, we've heard these reports about fish contamination across the ocean from the Fukushima disaster. How real of a threat or of an issue is that really?
Well, the nuclear plant on the Japanese side of the Pacific is bleeding radiation into the Pacific every day. About 400 tons of radioactive water every day for over 1,000 days now has been pouring into the Pacific. Now, as that plume crosses the Pacific, it dilutes because the Pacific's a big place. But we are beginning to see low levels of radiation in the water. I have told people I wouldn't mind swimming in the water, I wouldn't mind walking along the water, but until our government, whether it's states or national government, tell me what's in the fish, I remain very concerned about eating the fish that are coming from the Pacific.
Arnie Gundersen with Fair Winds Energy Associates, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching this interview with Fair Winds Chief Engineer Arnie Gundersen. Today, Arnie is in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania at Penn State University giving a keynote address at the TMI at 35 retrospective. Keep an eye out for this speech as we will be releasing it very shortly.
When human beings are responsible for things, when humans lay our human hands on them and use our human brains and implement our human ideas with our humanness, there is by definition the possibility for human error. You can say your safety assurances are superhuman, but unless your safety experts are from the planet Krypton, nothing you as a human, nothing you can do will ever overcome the possibility of human error. Accidents happen, mistakes happen, they happen all the time. And sometimes they happen all the time in the same place. When such a place is near an earthquake fault or two, and when such a place also plays host to nuclear fission on a regular basis, that's news. And here it is. By the year 1970, construction permits had been issued for a new nuclear power plant in California. When the utility Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, applied for the permits, the company said the site had only insignificant faults that have shown no movement for at least 100,000 and possibly millions of years. Construction costs for that assuredly totally non-seismic nuclear plant were estimated to be around $320 million. Barely a year later, it's 1971, and a new fault line is discovered offshore, less than 3 miles from the plant's location. Humans decide that the site is still well suited for releasing energy from atoms, as long as the money spent on construction goes from $320 million to more than $5 billion, slightly less than a 15-fold increase. Then by 1981, again. Turns out that the seismic supports built to deal with that newly discovered offshore fault, we humans built them backwards. Literally, we looked at the blueprints the wrong way around. It's like a postmodern episode of Mr. Magoo, except nuclear apocalypse is the punchline. So all of the retrofitting, which was done backwards, had to be re-retrofitted. That will be another $2.2 billion, please. Flash forward to 2008, and again, a new fault discovered less than a mile from the plant. PG&E and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they go ahead and decide that the new fault line, no biggie, it'll be fine. But the State Energy Commission in California begs to differ. The State Energy Commission says that not enough is known about that new fault line, and the plant should do some 3D seismic mapping to see if things are safe.
That was 3 years ago, and no, they still haven't done the seismic mapping. But they have been running this star-crossed, human error-riddled nuclear reactor all along. And then Japan happened. And when Japan happened, California's Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom went on TV to draw attention to the safety shortcomings at this godforsaken California nuclear plant. And then the Union of Concerned Scientists dropped this non-atomic bombshell. Turns out after all the safety scares this plant has been through, after all the billions and billions of dollars of safety upgrades at this plant, turns out that the emergency cooling pumps that are supposed to kick in if anything goes wrong in the reactors or the spent fuel pools, those pumps were disabled for 18 months. They were non-operational before anybody noticed. The valves were stuck for a year and a half. Nothing approaching an earthquake or tsunami like Japan happened during those 18 months, but if it had, there would have been no backup cooling systems available at this California nuclear plant. After all of that, the geophysicist, who is also the California state senator whose district includes this plant, is now asking for its license to be suspended, at least until the updated seismic studies can be finished. That state senator is a Republican. And did I mention he's a geophysicist? I have long had a theory that people who came before us should be given the benefit of the doubt when they gave names to things that were clearly designed to warn us away from those things. The canyon where California's godforsaken nuclear power plant is located is called Diablo Canyon. That should have been a hint, maybe. It's the nuclear power plant from HE double hockey sticks. Diablo Canyon? Seriously?
Almost half of the world's population of Saiga antelope died this month, and no one is sure why. On May 28th, the United Nations Environment Program confirmed that more than 120,000 of the critically endangered antelopes died throughout central Kazakhstan since mid-May. It's the largest die-off event of the Saiga antelope on record. The animals have had a rough go in the past couple decades. Before the 1990s, there were more than 1 million Saiga on the planet. By 2003, disease and poaching brought that number down to 21,000. They rebounded a bit since then, but the recent mass die-off is catastrophic for the species. While experts don't know what caused the deaths, they do suspect that a combination of biological and environmental factors played a part, possibly a respiratory illness. Whatever the reason, scientists fear that a species that's been around since the Ice Age might soon disappear for good. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Molly.
Calling it the Lake of Death as they scoop up an estimated 156 tons of dead freshwater popoche chub from the surface of Lake Cajititlan. It's a sardine-sized species, about the length of a finger. It's native to the western state of Jalisco. Around 40 million of them popped to the surface last week, not to eat or to jump, but as dead fish. It's a grim picture for locals as fishermen, firefighters, city workers, and staff at the state agricultural ministry, with their mouths and noses covered for the stench, scoop up the fish and bury them in a concrete pit. Now, 3 smaller hauls of these dead fish had previously surfaced in May, June, and August, but this is by far the most extreme. Public blame for this lies in about 3 areas right now. One local mayor links it to the Institutional Revolutionary Party, saying it contaminated the lake in an attempt to discredit his environmental record. Another politician suggests the mass deaths were merely the result of natural biological cycles. State officials point to the ruling government's failure to properly treat the sewage and other waste entering the lake from towns and nearby industrial plants. The government has admitted to discovery of a fault in one wastewater treatment plant where animal remains, solvents, combustibles, and industrial chemicals are processed before being released into that very lake. But in a country with relatively lax environmental protections and little recourse for residents wronged by big industry, the people of these 6 villages surrounding the lake are hardest hit. So as politicians continue to argue, the people who run the fishing operations, the food stores, and restaurants are the ones to suffer. In Los Angeles,
Pollution in China is becoming a more and more serious problem. As of Wednesday this week, authorities in China have removed about 110 tons or 220,000 pounds of dead fish from a 40-kilometer section of the Fuhe River in Hubei province. Exactly how many fish were removed is still unknown. Locals report that almost all the fish have died out in that section of the river. Hubei environmental officials said that the reason for all the dead fish is the ammonia in the water, which came from a local chemical plant. The officials have told the company named Shuanghuan Science and Technology Stock to cease operations. There's a combination of reasons of why the river became so deadly. In addition to the chemical plant, there's domestic sewage and the waste from a paper mill. The environmental department warned the public not to eat the dead fish, but said that the drinking water was not affected. I'm still not sure whether I should believe in that. This has really affected the fishing village around the area. About 1,600 villagers make their living from fishing, and they could lose up to 70,000 yuan each day because of the ammonia pollution. This is not the first time that a ton of dead animals have surfaced in China's rivers. Back in March this year, about 6,000 pig corpses were found in the Huangpu River. State media reported that a Chinese farm dumped the pigs into the river, and similarly back then, officials said that the drinking water was safe, but of course Chinese netizens and the Chinese people were very skeptical, and they had good reason to be.
Chinese authorities are investigating thousands of dead fish in a river near the site of the recent chemical explosion in Tianjin. And while this disaster occurs away from home, US scientists have started an investigation of their own as to why dozens of large whales are washing up dead on the shores of Alaska. 30 large whales in total since May. And the National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration has declared the string of large whale deaths around Alaska as an unusual mortality event and are racing to find out why. First of all, these fish in China. Well, the explosion last week in Tianjin killed 114 people, and it was a chemical building containing over 40 different chemicals that exploded. And the military cleanup teams, they've been working on this. They've been trying to stop the leak of chemicals, but this many dead fish popping up in a river just nearby, it doesn't bode well. Although Chinese authorities are trying to deny as yet that it has anything to do with the chemical explosion. Here's a quote from Deng Xiaowen, who's head of Tianjin's Environment Monitoring Center, who is denying the correlation between the chemical release and the dead fish. He said it was not uncommon for fish to die en masse in local rivers during the summer due to poor quality. When the temperature rises, oxygen will evaporate and fish may die of hypoxia. But you have to be concerned about the ongoing repercussions of this.
I mean, they will tell you anything instead of the truth. In China, what is happening with the press and the journalists that are trying to uncover what really happened is they're completely, fenced off of the area. Now, we know that there were 300% higher levels of cyanide in the water in the site of this explosion. We have to wake up. What's happening to the rivers and to the oceans in this planet is just a warning that we're killing our environment. We can't see this and don't feel that it's going to get passed on to humans. This is something that this is part of our food chain. We are eating the same things that are killing these animals, that are killing the whales in Alaska. And on top of that, we see these events and we see the Obama administration allowing the drill of oil in the Alaska Arctic. Absolutely. What is it going to take for us to stop and change our attitudes, with our environment?
The site of these large